Hello, class. I'd like to just go over the Alvin White discussion so we could come to some understanding of one of the components of the class. If we were in class, you would be responsible in your group for completing a sheet. We are not going to address that. Your overall thoughts about the reading was something that was discussed in class. What counts as a historic source? And keep in mind, both readings talked about bias in history. So if we're looking at this particular document, which is a primary document in this class, I want you to think of a primary document as a document from the past that is free of interpretation. So if you're looking at this particular image here, just think about what conclusions you could make. So I want you to pause this screencast here and just look at it and start jotting down some of the conclusions that you have. All right, not sure how long you took, how many you came up with, but what I would say here is for number one, the fact that you have to pay $50 and the year appears to be 1900, that might seem to be a lot. So we know that there's some sort of fee that is involved. One of the arguments against the NAWSA historically is that it catered to people with money. So it might leave people of the lower class, working class, out of the equation because they cannot pay a $50 fee. So when we're looking at historical documents, we use them as a guide, a starting point for other research. So you might then want to start looking at Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, try to figure out who these women are, and also the fact that, look, there is this little caret here that is filled in with American. One of the things we know is that the NWSA and the AWSA merged and created the NAWSA. So that could be another starting point for your research using primary source documents. And primary source documents are allowed in the class. Remember, they are free of interpretation. We talked about the gift of Alvin White, and the gift is simply this PhD candidate who is exposed to a different interpretation of American history, a perspective that is filled with African American characters that this PhD candidate was not aware of. So the main point of the reading, both readings, was really just looking at the bias in history and how history has multiple perspectives. In the What is History piece, they compared history to science. And science, you might think, okay, well, we should be able to test our theory, and as long as we have similar conditions, we should have the same outcome. Think about whether or not that is possible in history. Can historians support the same argument? The answer could be yes. It could also be no. And there seems to be a lot of gray area when we're looking at this body of information. Determine if the thesis is fact. JFK was assassinated. That is a fact. Al Qaeda knocked down the Twin Towers on 9/11. That is a fact. However, if we're looking at the 9/11 Commission report, which is a government document compiled by the US government after 9/11, this could act as a primary source. And here you see at this particular page, 49 of the Commission report, that's looking at the motives behind the 9/11 attacks. JFK was assassinated by the Italian mafia. That is not a fact. I guess it depends on the interpretation that you're buying, and this is an example of bias in history. Al Qaeda attacked on 9/11 because bin Laden declared war on the US. That seems to be a fact if you're looking at his fatwa or his declaration of war. Planes were hijacked on 9/11. This seems to be a fact. There is no bias in it. If we're looking at the motives and some of the other things, that is where we get into a gray area of debate. We know that planes were hijacked because we have the takeoff and the hijack times. And again, this is using the 9/11 Commission report. We know that two planes crashed into the North and South Tower, Flight 11 and Flight 175. We also know that jet fuel poured down and started to burn some of the fire block that caused one floor to kind of fall on another and fall down like a stack of pancakes. Stairway A. We know that there was one stairway that was not severed, which allowed people in the South Tower to get down. Here we see images of the 9/11 hijackers, the pilots, and they were members of what becomes known as the Hamburg Cell. Here we have all of the 9/11 hijackers. So you could think about some of the facts. Where is there a gray area? It recently has come out that maybe Saudi Arabia was involved in some way for the 9/11 attacks. That is new information. History is always changing. In the roommate scenario, this was in the What is History piece. Pretty much what's happening here is a college student comes home, his roommate is gone, and he starts to come up with a thesis. And his thesis is that the student has failed out and has just left. And so this individual starts to gather data from multiple sources, looking at phone bills, looking at grades, looking at so many pieces of evidence, and he's just trying to support his thesis, which is one of the things that I will be asking you to do throughout the year. Support your thesis. Support, support, support. Cannot stress that enough. Does history change or does it stay the same? So there's a body of information. We're using World War I. Well, this top line could represent the German perspective, what was the German motive? And this middle line could represent the European nations, Britain and France, and maybe Russia. And then here we can look at the American perspective. Keep in mind they're all about World War I, but their interpretation is going to vary because it is based on that nation's perspective. And you can pretty much do that with any topic. And so that's one of the things in this class. Students usually struggle with the different interpretations because they want to have just one clear, precise answer. And history just does not work that way. There's also a debate about linear versus cyclical history. And this is really about humanity. Where does history start and where does it end? Is the end considered the end of times? I don't know. Or are we just simply going and repeating the same patterns? A war takes place, a war ends. A war takes place, a war ends. Linear versus cyclical. Which side of the debate are you on? Are we just repeating some of the same things and we learn nothing from history? Or is all of the historical information, events, is all of that stuff just leading us to somewhere? That is the linear cyclical debate. So, if we were in class, we would be looking at our question here: how is the reading challenge your understanding of history? And I kind of asked you to think about that question again. The Gift of Alvin White.